because we hadn't fully settled into our global pandemic rhythm, I saw a post circling around Facebook that said, "Whoever is supposed to go to Nineveh, just go already." And being the awful gift that keeps on giving with so much despair and anxiety everywhere we turn these last several months, 2020 has felt like there is a Jonah somewhere out there who is ignoring God and God's instructions. Our saving grace up until a week ago has been that we have been able to go outside, until that was taken away from pretty much the entire West Coast, being on fire, destroying acres and acres of land and homes and communities and lives. And sure enough, I just saw the other day the words, "Whoever is supposed to go to Nineveh, just go already." This time around, it seemed much more serious. Everyone knows Jonah's story. It's an amazing story that says so much about God and us. The main detail that most people remember about this story is that he got swallowed by a whale and then spit back up on dry land. But Jonah actively ignoring God, and Jonah being a bigot, and Jonah throwing a temper tantrum, and Jonah being a cranky prophet, that's where the real story is. God told Jonah to go to Nineveh. They're in a bad way. They've got to do better, and I need you to tell them that. Jonah said, "Nope," and went the other direction. And can you blame him? Nineveh's evil was a dirty stench to God. Nineveh was the capital of Assyria, the most powerful empire in that day. The Assyrians were the enemy of Jonah's people. They had ravaged and pillaged so much of Israel, taking their wealth, occupying their land, making totally unfair demands. They also had a reputation for cruelty and brutality of a repulsive kind. When their armies captured a city or a country, unspeakable atrocities would occur, like skinning people alive, decapitation, mutilation, ripping out people's tongues, making a pyramid of human heads, piercing the chin with a rope, and forcing prisoners to live in kennels like dogs. The Jewish people hated the Assyrians for their bloodthirsty cruelty, hated them for their idolatry, hated them for their arrogance. And the Assyrians obviously hated the Jews. They had no need for each other. And God tells Jonah to basically call out these people on every aspect of their godless, inhumane, dysfunctional, greedy, and idolatrous behavior. I suppose on one hand, it might be kind of an intriguing invitation. I get to show up with a bullhorn and tell these people how horrible they are. On the other hand, it would be terrifying because it's me against an empire, and we all know that empires are pretty powerful. Needless to say, Jonah does not take up God on this unthinkable offer. As far as Jonah is concerned, Nineveh can go straight to hell, literally. Go ahead, God, push the button, open the trap door, let them fall straight down into the endless pit of darkness and punishment. That's how Jonah felt about Nineveh. So Jonah takes off on a boat in the opposite direction. He just flat out ignores God. And he lives through an amazing experience that as we've heard, you're all familiar with, that an experience that gets him tossed from a boat and swallowed up by a big fish or whale or leviathan or something. Then he gushes over with gratitude for God saving him when the fish vomits him up on the beach. And Jonah then kind of reevaluates his plan and decides he should probably go to Nineveh. But he hardly puts any effort into this once-in-a-lifetime divinely sanctioned call out of these horrible Ninevites. He shows up and says like 5 words. But it worked. Everyone in Nineveh, including the king, they're all in. They repented. They stopped their violent ways. They dealt with the cruel and unjust systems they all were a part of and instituted. They all got kind of unified, and rich and poor, privileged and underprivileged, and important people and unimportant people, and all colors and classes. This group of people in the Assyrian Empire at that time got it together. And you would think that such a radical turnaround by a horrendously corrupt people would be something to celebrate, right? Especially after you just kind of did the bare minimum to get the ball rolling. But Jonah didn't celebrate this. Jonah was furious with God. Jonah knew deep in his heart, back in his mind, that he knew God would listen to them and give them a second chance. Jonah knew that God would err on the side of love. And so Jonah yells at God. He just lets loose. God, I knew it. When I was back home, I knew this was going to happen. That's why I ran off to Tarshish. I knew you were sheer grace and mercy, not easily angered, rich in love, and ready at the drop of a hat to turn your plan of punishment into a program of forgiveness. So, God, if you won't kill them, kill me. I'm better off dead. Wow. What a drama queen. I mean, can you imagine being that angry at the love of God? Can you imagine getting so fired up that the people you didn't think deserved grace actually ended up receiving grace? Can you imagine that a group of people would do a total 180, be given a new beginning, change their ways and systems, and now suddenly be about justice when clearly they weren't before? Can you imagine coming to a realization that God's justice doesn't line up with your idea of justice because it threatens maybe your own perspective or your own privileged life, and it makes you so angry that you would rather die than see people thrive? I mean, it never seemed to cross Jonah's mind that the pagans, whoever they were on the ship, on that boat, in their attempts to save him from all harm at all costs, were much more like God than Jonah was. It never seemed to cross Jonah's mind how much he had depended on the kindness of strangers and enemies. It never seemed to cross Jonah's mind that the big fish was more obedient to God than Jonah was. And it must have felt much better after it vomited up this sour bigot of a prophet. It never seemed to cross Jonah's mind that God invited him into a bigger story, a much bigger story, that he got to share how the same grace the Jewish people knew was available to an entire city that didn't deserve it. Jonah wanted wrath when God wanted grace. And that's the scandal of God. That's the scandal of Christianity and the gospel. That's what it's all about. But grace, of course, it's hard to accept. It's hard to believe. It's hard to receive, especially if it threatens our own comfort or viewpoint or outlook. Grace shocks us in what it offers. Grace frightens us in what it does for others. Grace teaches us that God does for others what we would perhaps never do for them. Grace is that gift that costs everything to the giver and nothing to the receiver. Grace is given to those who don't deserve it, barely recognize it, and hardly appreciate it. There is no math equation to solve grace. Grace is the most unfair thing in the universe. It always has been and always will be. And was not this finally made clear in Jesus Christ? Is this really something to get upset with God over? I suppose there's a little Jonah in all of us, and maybe a whole lot of Jonah in most of us. Call it the Jonah syndrome. It may be that we are aware of God's nature, who God is really like, but we just don't like that. That God would give grace to those I do not believe deserve it. Jonah wanted no part of that kind of love. At the end of the day, Jonah's heart wasn't all that different from Nineveh's, but whose heart really changed? Nineveh's heart changed. Well, after Jonah walked away from Nineveh, God decides to mess with him a little more and gives him a bush, a tree, to shade him from the sun. And then God takes it away with a worm, and in no time, Jonah is really angry again. And he pouts. And God asks him, is it right for you to be angry? Do you do well to be so angry, Jonah? Yes, angry enough to die, he says. Then God says, Jonah, you need to chill. All this bitterness and anger really isn't working out for you. You are angry about all the wrong things. You are pouting about a bush, which you didn't make, you didn't water, you didn't grow. Shouldn't I be concerned about an entire city of human beings? And that's the question God leaves lingering in the air at the end of this timeless story. Should I not be concerned? Should I not care about all the women and men and children in Nineveh? Should I not care about grace? Should I not care about keep giving grace? God makes it clear that we all have the freedom to join in this process of hope and renewal rather than carry on in bitterness and corruption. And grace is both the first and the last word in that process. Grace is the reason we are here and why we get to share the story of our lives by sharing God's story. Grace is the word our world needs more than ever. Grace is a place of belonging for everyone. Grace is what kept relentlessly pursuing Jonah, no matter where he went or what he did or how much he avoided or ignored God. Grace is what keeps working through our own ineptness and unresolved anger, and God knows what other issues we have. Grace is what kept God invested in Nineveh. Grace is what keeps God invested in you and me and in whoever they are. Grace is what reminds us that God is God and we are not. Grace is what locates us in this vast geography of second chances, new beginnings, a whole lot of restoration, and the freedom to be for one another, regardless of who the other may be. May you continue to receive this beautiful grace. Amen.